Hello and welcome to a new vlog. So let me just get straight into it and tell you all about the books I read. I am feeling better now. This is the first day where I'm going to attempt to leave the house. We shall see if it happens. But yes, I did do some reading while I was still having some downtime, thanks to my flare-up. So let me tell you what I read. So once again, because I'm just going straight through the books, I will start with the ones that were sort of my least favorite and work my way up to my favorite reads of this vlog. So I'm gonna, Sylvie, you cannot lick yourself on my lap. Your breath absolutely reeks. I'm going to start with the DNFs first. Yes, there were two this time. So we've got the choice for my TBR that I picked based on the cover. And look, the cover for this still is stunning to me. And this is The Blind Earthworm in the Labyrinth by Veeraporn Nethiprapha, and it's translated by Kong Rithti. And this is a Thai translation about a young girl whose mother on the day of her birth discovers that her husband is having an affair. And from then on, this young woman is fated to carry the weight of her parents' disappointments. And let me tell you, the weight of that was heavy. The writing is beautiful. It's very lyrical, but it's also quite fever dreamy, very, very purple. But the context and the subject matter was so utterly depressing. It was really dragging me down, and I wasn't enjoying the reading experience, and that is the reason that I did DNF this book. But I think if you were a lover of purple prose, you were a lover of heavier human emotional subjects and topics, then you might enjoy this book. And if you like very sort of meandering, melodic, confusing, not sure where this is going to go stories, you might want to give it a read. The next, oh sorry if I banged ya. The next DNF for me was The Undermining of Twyla and Frank. This is the second in the Undertaking of Mercy and Heart series by Megan Bannon. And so this is set in this sort of magical town. It's got a Western kind of feel because you've got sheriffs, but they're called marshals. And in this particular case, they're older protagonists. So they're in their 50s, I believe. They're nearing retirement. All their children are grown. You've got Twyla Banneker and Frank Ellis. And this is meant to be touted as a very, 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 very slow burn friends to lovers. Along the way though, they do see other people. So that's something that I really don't have a taste for. It turns me off. In this particular story, there is the sudden appearance of dragons, and these dragons breathe out glitter. They're glitter dragons. And unfortunately, not even these cute AF kawaii glitter dragons could save this book for me, because I was just so bored. It was honestly putting me to sleep. And I read just over 100 pages and I couldn't do it anymore. I just thought, this is just feeling tedious. Stuff kind of happened. It's very slow paced. And I guess the main characters to themselves, they just weren't interesting to me. And I didn't feel obviously any sexual chemistry or vibe between them besides being friends. And yeah, I just didn't want to push through because I knew for me it was feeling like a 3-star. But if you loved The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy and you want to more sit in that world, you can read the book. If you like much older characters who fall in love after a ton of time together, a long time, and just realize that they're the right people for each other, and you like a little bit of action. I don't know how much action this has in it, so I can't say if it's cozy or if it's not cozy. The first 150 or so pages felt rather cozy and not very ominous. This might be the book for you. And then I picked up The Atmospherians by Isle. It's not, oh, that's a bit weird. Okay, so the cover says Alex McElroy, but then on Goodreads it says Isle McElroy. I don't know what's going on there. Now, I picked this book up because it was the lowest rated on my TBR. And let me tell you a bit about it. So basically you have a disgraced influencer who decides to start a cult with, I'm going to say her frenemy. It's a childhood friend, but they're dynamic, toxic. And basically they're trying to rehabilitate men. There's this sort of phenomenon that's occurred in this world where men are becoming part of hordes. And sometimes these hordes do heroic things like save cats from trees and help elderly ladies across the road. But sometimes they kick German Shepherd puppies to death. and jump off the top of hardware buildings. So they're thinking we can get these sort of at-risk men and make sure they don't ever become part of these hordes, and they open up this center in the bush with dubious practices. There are a lot of trigger warnings in this. I say the main one is eating disorders. It's so heavy in there. There's some fat phobia and eating disorders. Eating disorder stuff in here, obviously toxic relationships and friendships, the whole thing about social media, because one of them is a former influencer and one of her viewers who is a troll. Does it say, wait, no, I can't say what happens with the abusive troll, but yes, there's a lot of that kind of subject matter in this book. It started off well for me. I was kind of into it, and the character does appear morally grey, but you're kind of rooting for her. It seems to be sort of like a misunderstanding. As the book progresses, though, the character became too unlikable for me, and the story itself became tedious and confusing. It didn't really have a very clear narrative flow. It felt very bloated, just with unnecessary chapters. It could have been cut way down. I think it might have been better as a novella, something very quick and fast paced. The thing that tipped it over the edge for me, and I will give it as a warning, is that there is an animal death, and it is a violent one at the hands of men. So at that point, I was just irate because I hadn't really been enjoying the experience. I should have DNF'd it, but it's one of those weird books where I thought maybe the ending will pay off. So sometimes with weird litfic, I feel like the need to push through, because sometimes they can just really amaze you and turn everything around. That was not the case with this one for me, which is why I gave it 2 stars. But if you love the world of social media and influencers falling off their high horses and unhealthy interrelational dynamics and the idea of like rehabilitating bad men and just very weird and wacky books in general, where you're not quite sure what the plot is or point is and where it's going to go, then give it a read. But yes, for me, it wasn't to my taste. The next book I picked up is Dealing with Problem Periods by Dr. Anita Mitra. I don't tend to rate a lot of nonfiction. If I do, this would probably be a 3. This is a great, I guess, beginner's guide to Western views of period issues, but also just the general, but it's also great for people that have never been to the gynecologist, because it breaks down how to make an appointment with a gynecologist, what happens at a gynecologist's office so you know what to expect, what certain tests are and what they entail, what medications are, and also the not only side effects but risks associated with those medications, which I think is fantastic, because from personal experience with a lot of regular GPs, not once did they ever tell me what the possible contraindications were or the side effects. So if you're wondering if your doctor has said, hey, I want to put you on the pill, this can give you a bit of more of an information than what's just normally offered at a doctor's office. Same things, for instance, with the marina. So that's the coil that goes internally, where they did not mention once the possibility of it rupturing through the uterus, which can happen, or the fact, I think stuff like that does cause issues with bone density. Like, there's a whole thing. So I do appreciate that this is showing both sides. It's still from a completely Western medicine stance. They do briefly mention some other things that could help with period issues, because a lot of period issues are hormonal based as well. Things like proper sleep, nutrition, and regular exercise. But yeah, I'd say it's a great base point, jumping off point for people who want to know a little bit more about their cycle, about what possible issues that they're having, that those could be, or what treatments or diagnostic assessments will be made to ascertain that. So yeah, it's very easy to read too. It's done in a very simple, straightforward language, which is easy to understand. And like I said, it doesn't overload you with too much information. So I think this is very accessible for a lot of people. So like, put my lower rating aside. That's just because I'm more of a holistic person and I like a whole being approach, not just the Western treatment, diagnosis and treatment method for issues to do with the female hormonal and reproductive system. But I think for the masses, like I said, this is a good starting point. The next book I picked up is Foul Days. This is part of the Witch's Compendium of Monsters, and this is by Genoveva Dimova. This is says it's The Witcher meets Naomi Novik. Maybe. It's a Slavic folklore-based fantasy book where you have a witch who lives in this walled-in enclave that is filled with monsters. So basically, they've put up a wall to keep the monsters out from the city, but all the people that were on the other side of the wall are now stuck living with the monsters. And there's this period of time called the Foul Days, which lasts, I think it was from Christmas until New Year's, whatever that 12-day period is, where the monsters run amok extra. You know, it's just they've all sipped their juice boxes and their razzmatazzi ready to go. So this is filled with obviously Slavic monsters and mythology and folklore. Love that. You know that I'm a sucker for books based on Slavic myth. This seems to be my favorite. What's the word? It's not mythology. It's to do with gods and the belief system. Pantheon. It's my favorite pantheon of like gods and monsters and things. And so for me, the best part of this book is based on the Slavic folklore. But as I was saying, she's on this side of the wall. She has her shadow. Somehow there is a particular monster, the king of the monsters, the czar of the monsters, who has taken an absolute morbid fascination with her. And she's just not strong enough to continue to defy him. So she decides to try and make it over the wall. So there's a lot of themes in here too about immigration and refugees and class systems. Life on the other side of the wall, though, isn't what she thought it was. She had to trade something of immense value and she's having regrets, basically. And then ends up having to team up with this police officer to try get her shadow back, to try and take down the monster. Look, for me, I did find that the pacing was quite erratic. Once again, there's not a lot of likable characters besides, oh my God, my favorite character in this is Villa. She is sort of a master witch who is alluded to having been married to Baba Yaga, who is like the mother of all witches. And I loved her and would have wanted the whole book with her POV, please. That would have been phenomenal. But everybody else, all of the characters just felt tepid. I didn't believe their connections to each other. There was like a, once again, unhealthy friendship dynamic between the main character and these two other citizens in Schönegrad. So it just lacked feeling. I didn't buy the high stakes, and there were high stakes, but I didn't believe it. I didn't believe in it. And so the story and the plot also felt a bit frazzled and it needed editing. I don't think it needed to be as long as it was, and I felt like some really concise cutting would have made the story a lot more enjoyable, improve the pacing. And the romance, though, in this too, for me, was a flop. Wasn't buying it. Wasn't a fan of how it came about and their backstories. It gave me the ick a little bit. So I've given it a 3.25 overall. Like I said, mostly it's just based on the setting and the mythology it's based upon. And the mythology it's built upon. I love those kinds of monsters, so I love reading about them and I love the stories. But this one did feel a bit too in the morbs. You know, it's a bit melancholic. It needed a kick in its rear end to get it going. But if you love Slavic mythology, if you love stories where there is a wall that divides the monsters from the people, if you love a story where there are a ton of morally grey characters, so many morally grey characters, and there's a bit of a Beauty and the Beast kind of vibe to it as well, then this might be a book that you really enjoy. The next book I picked up was The Dead Cat Tail Assassins by P. Jelly Clark. I'm just going to start by saying that title is a bit of a mouthful and hard to remember. But this is basically about an undead assassin who gets put on her own guild's hit list. And I can't really tell you more about the book because it will spoil the twist you find out very early on, and it's a good one. I did enjoy the twist. And the idea of this is really cool. It is super cool. But the execution was mid, I must say. And the words, Errol's fiery fucking tits, was said a bit too much. It was like overkill. The world building was interesting. There were some choices of words that did pull me out. It felt very out of place for the book and the setting. And those were the words edgelord and neckbeard. And I'm like, that's very modern terminology. And I understand immediately now what you mean for that character and their personality and behaviors, but those words, really? So it just, there was something about it that was a bit mismatched. But yeah, there were certain things I really liked, like all of the different assassins and their style and their personalities. That was cool. There was kind of like this god element there. I can't talk about a lot, okay? Because it's one of those books where even if you read the plot, it's very vague and it's for a reason. But yeah, I walked away with 3.25 star feelings from it. It had this potential but didn't quite deliver for me. I also struggled personally to connect, feel for the characters, but it is interesting. If you like books about assassins and you like a lot of fight scenes, because there are a lot of fight scenes in this, naturally the main character is a trained killer, then this is for you. There's obviously a lot to do with gods and bargains and deals and oaths made, debts that need to be repaid, double crossing, backstabbing. What's really going on here kind of vibes. There's also a class system that exists in this world, but it was quite fast paced because from day one, character is on the run for not having completed her mark, which they called shipping, and that annoyed me too. So instead of saying like killing, they'll say who needs to be shipped. It's just, I don't know. It was made to be, oh, this is a very clever idea to say that, yes, I've shipped the package. I'm like, okay, I guess, maybe, I don't know. Yes, that was the Dead Cat Tail Assassins, 3.25 stars. And the last book that I read for this vlog is The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. I have a lot to say about this and the topic in general. Basically, the premise of this is that the more time children spend on tech, the worse the effect on their mental health and well-being and their brain development. Now, for girls, it tends to be a lot of time spent on social media, and for boys, they said it's more time spent playing video games or watching pornography. Now, I do agree with most of the book, but there are some things I don't agree with. I'd say the biggest ones here were to do with gender identity and religion. So those chapters, not for me. Also the idea that tech alone might be to blame for an increase in anxiety in children, I'm not 100% on. So a bit of background about myself is I do have a degree in psychology. I came from what you would call a traditional authoritarian, punitive, sort of abusive sort of childhood rearing style. I had general anxiety disorder. When it came time to become a parent, I followed a gentle attachment, play-based style of parenting. Both of my children also have general anxiety disorder. So I don't think technology alone is to blame for that. I don't think parenting style alone is to blame. I think there's a multitude of factors. It's not just nurture in terms of their environment, their diet, what they consume, how they're raised. But I think nature also plays a part. I think genetically there are certain genes that are more commonly associated with a high level of anxiety, and human beings are more pronounced fight response. All of that together, I think, could give you a high disposition to developing anxiety. The other issue I had with this book is the author pushes for children to be free range. So that basically means left to their own devices outside. So not supervised by adults, off to go on their own adventures. Now, these Gen Z and Gen Alpha kids, it's not the same world, and they're not the same as it was pre-millennial. So I'm a millennial. It's not the same. Okay, so these days, yes, maybe parents are more cautious in terms of their children's safety, physical safety. Maybe we do have a heightened fear of sex offenders, even though perhaps the data suggests that it is no higher than it was back in the day. But as a parent, I feel like your main responsibility is to keep your child alive and relatively unharmed until the age of 18. And if your child is alone, unsupervised, if your child is out there without help or assistance on hand, it does increase the risk factor. And I think for most parents, that benefit to risk ratio is not worth it. So the benefit of children going off and making mistakes and learning in the wild is not worth any possible risk that could come to harm them. Because at the end of the day, if something did happen to your kid while they were out and about by themselves, could you live with that? I know that I could not. I would feel guilt for the rest of my life that there was no one there to help. Maybe it could have been avoided, whatever happened to them. Maybe it couldn't, but at the end of the day, if you're not there, I just feel like at the end of the day, I feel like having kids within reach is not a big hindrance to them and their social development. I think personally also kids being alone with other kids, 12-year-olds today are not like 12-year-olds back then either. I know that a lot of 12-year-olds do partake in things like vaping, drugs, and sex. A lot of kids are going into puberty at much earlier ages, and therefore I think being alone with peers, unsupervised, can also increase the chance that your child will end up participating in these more dangerous activities because their peers are engaging in those activities. So for me, I feel like having a parent there, whether it's at the park, there's a parent there, they're not next to the children, but they're at the park the children are in, not within hearing distance, but within visual distance. I think it still allows the kids to play and talk and have fun without feeling they're being observed. Whilst if something does happen, there is a parent there immediately at hand to help them and to take care of them. And it's the same thing where I would say having sleepovers at your house or having play dates where your kids can play in person and really foster and work on those relationships is beneficial, but there's still a parent there to provide support or help if necessary. So I'm not a super fan of the whole, if kids were allowed to run amok, they wouldn't be anxious, they wouldn't be addicted to tech. We need to set them loose, let them run free. I'm like, yeah, no. But what I agree with is that too much technology is detrimental to a child's well-being and their brain development. The issue that I face and that I turned to this book and that I read this book hoping that I would find assistance with is that I am a parent who did not allow their child a phone until they were in high school. My child is not allowed on apps like TikTok and Instagram, and my child has tech limits. They have about 3 hours a day where they're allowed on technology, and that is it. The issue that I have is that I am in the severe minority of parents who do this. So the majority, and I really do mean the majority, I don't know if it's like this in other countries, but here in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, the majority of children, especially those in high school, have unlimited access to tech and tech time. So they're allowed to download whatever apps they want to download. And these kids are literally on their phones or tech from the moment they're awake to the moment they go to sleep. So then what happens is my children feel ostracized and unconnected to their peers and that they're missing out because I am not allowing them the same freedoms and privileges. I won't even call it privilege, but access these other parents are allowing their children. And so the price that I'm paying for that is that my children do not like me. It erodes our personal relationship and my kids feel disconnected from their peers. So this is a double-edged sword issue for me because I'm trying to look out for their mental health and their brain development and their long-term well-being because I know that excessive time spent on technology, especially as I have 2 daughters, time spent on social media can cause severe harm. Like I said, it literally molds their brain and their pathways and their neural systems and their attention spans and everything else in a less than ideal way. So I'm trying to do what's best for them, but at the same time, the price I'm paying is that they hate me and they feel disconnected from their friends and weird and on the outside. And that is absolutely devastating for a child whose mental health and well-being does heavily rely upon acceptance from their peers. They want to fit in. But conversely though, the other solution would be to what? To allow them just free reign, to let them be online for as long as they like, to let them be exposed to God knows what on things like TikTok and Instagram. I know Instagram's a bit better, but TikTok is just anything goes on there, and see them devolve. Because any parent here will know that the more time their children spend connected to technological devices, the worse their behavior. It is one of the easiest experiments to do. Leave your kid glued to the screen and see how they devolve into this cranky, grumpy, moody thing. Disconnect them. All of a sudden your sweet child is back, who has imagination, who wants to converse and connect to you. So this book, unfortunately, the solutions that it offers are one, governmental. So the government needs to provide restrictions so that people under the age of 16 cannot access or have accounts with these apps. and they have to have stricter versions of age verification on them. Schools, which look, thankfully, the school that my children go to, which is a public school, is phone free. They cannot go on their phones at school. I am so grateful. I'm so grateful for that I know that they've got that 7 hours a day where they can't go on their school out of, my sight. And then parents, and that's the thing. I think for this to work, for our children to thrive and develop in a healthy way, all parents need to be on the same side. We all need to be on board with restricting our children's access to tech and to certain apps until they're of a certain age. But how is that going to happen? My ex-husband and I are constantly boggled by the fact that all of our children's friends are just allowed to do whatever, and they're on their phones, and it's even into the evening. I still also implement a strict bedtime and sleep schedule for my kids, because I also know how vital the right amount of sleep is for a developing brain. But their friends know. I know that their friends all have this hour and that hour because my kids have put me on the phone to their friends and their friends' parents, and they're like, yes, we let our kid go to bed at 11 or 12, or they go to bed when they're tired. So once again, I'm the mean mum. I'm the mean mum because I make my kids go to sleep and I make my kids do things other than just sit on their tech all day. So yeah, and unless every single parent gets on board and limits their kids' screen time, unfortunately, things are not good. I see firsthand. I've got a Gen Z kid and a Gen A kid. And as soon as more tech is introduced, they pull away. So they become internalized, and everything, their whole world is then on this little screen, and it becomes their personality, and it becomes what they say and how they act, and they're addicted, and they have short tempers, and they have short attention spans. And the amount of also even peer relationship dramas is tenfold because they've got access to all of the kids in their cohort. So everybody is pinging everyone about their issues and gossiping and talking about and backstabbing. And it's not just, back in the day, you had you had like your handful of friends who you would have contact with and who could have access to you. But now they're getting accessed by so many people. How can they possibly keep up? How can they possibly too even deal with their own problems? We've got problems of everybody coming at them from all angles. So for me, another way that I try to combat it is that I will allow my children more time if they're using most of that time for FaceTiming their friends. I think the next best thing besides being in person with their friends is FaceTiming them, because at least not only do they hear them, they can see them and respond in real time. And it's better for the development, it's better for their connection and their social interactions and learning with peers. So yeah, this book is just stating the obvious. Too much tech, bad for children, but it's up to the parents to decide. And like I said, I made that decision. I'm still standing by it, and I'm just, even though I get constant pressure from my almost 13-year-old every goddamn day to allow her the same rights as her friends. And it's not going to stop. It's relentless. And like I said, it corrodes our relationship because I have to become a phone police. I don't like doing that. I don't like having to check my kids' screen time to make sure that they're complying with the time that I allow them, because kids get around everything. When I had my flare up for 2 weeks, did I become lax in my regulation of that? Yes. And then after I was well again, I went and checked her phone, and I was horrified by the amount of time she had racked up. But is that to be expected? Yes. She's not going to, I knew she's a kid, and if you give them the access and the ability to sort of, exploit their access to tech, they're going to do it because it's addictive and it makes them feel good to be online and be talking to their friends nonstop and to be watching. Well, my kids are allowed to watch YouTube. Do I hope that they're watching YouTube to learn how to draw, which some of them do, to learn how to code, which sometimes they do, to write, how to write essays? Yes, but I know, thanks to the inclusion now of shorts, that they're probably sitting there most of the time watching shorts, but I do have to monitor that. So I'm like, okay, you've watched 30 minutes of shorts, that's it. The other tech time has to be diverted elsewhere. But yeah, it sucks. It makes me sad because it's like, well, yeah, aren't you a play-based parent? If the kids don't want to play it, like my 13-year-old, tech time's over, she will lie face down on the floor. I'm like, do you want to play a board game? Do you want to do this? No, because she's upset because her friends are still online and she's not. So what can you do? It's one of those things, you hear your parents' voice in your head say, you'll thank me when you're older. I hate it. But it's true. I'm trying to tell them, hey, I'm protecting future you here. I'm trying to make sure your brain develops well. and enables you to have a better life and better decision-making skills and better relationships and better self-esteem. And I believe that limiting your tech is improving the chances of that. I guess another option, another solution would be to become a Luddite and move to a Luddite community, because that's the only way that that's the only way for your children to be on the same level as their peers, if every single child in that area, in that school, is also not on tech. Because if they go anywhere where children are on tech and they are not matching that, they are feeling left out, they're out of the loop and they're disconnected. And that is, like I said, also detrimental to a child's well-being and mental health. So damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of situation. You just got to decide what's the pain for you. For me, it's it's having to enforce restrictions and dealing with the consequences of that. The book itself, what would I rate it? I'd say 3.75. It's pretty easy to read. Like I said, there were some things in here that I do not agree with, and I just don't have the energy to get into them. Like I said, they're mostly about gender. And with the religion one, look, they did say at the end that in terms of the God-shaped hole in people and children, maybe it could also be filled with just a sort of reverence for the sacredness of nature. So I was like, okay, great. It was great to have like an option in there that didn't involve a religion, and just maybe more spirituality and appreciation of the world in general. But yeah, the gender one, I was like, no. Those were all of the books I read this week. And like I said, I guess this one was the favorite out of them all. Unfortunately, no bangers for me personally, but maybe there was something there that might interest somebody else. That is everything I read. And until next time, stay wild, star child.